What if I told you that centuries ago, an ancient civilization not only mapped the stars but seemingly peered through the veils of time itself? Persia, the land of towering palaces, whispered prophecies, and secrets etched into clay tablets, was home to visionaries who claimed to see the future with unsettling accuracy. Imagine a world where kings consulted celestial charts before waging wars, where mystics deciphered fate in the flicker of firelight, and where ordinary people lived in awe of predictions that stretched far beyond their lifetimes. This wasn't just superstition. It was a sophisticated tradition of divination that shaped empires and left behind a legacy of prophecies so precise they send chills down the spine of anyone who hears them today. Think about the last time you checked your horoscope or felt a strange tug of déjà vu. Now multiply that by thousands of years, add the weight of royal courts hanging on every word, and you'll start to grasp the gravity of Persian prophecy. These weren't vague fortunes mumbled at a marketplace. They were detailed, often frighteningly specific visions of events that would unfold centuries later. Wars, revolutions, even the rise and fall of rulers whose names hadn't yet been spoken. How could they have known? Were these seers tapping into some lost understanding of time, or was there something more profound at work in the whispers of the ancient world? That's the mystery we're unraveling today. Over the next 30 revelations, we'll journey through predictions that defy explanation. From a fallen empire's secret warnings about modern technology to a mystic's chillingly accurate description of a pandemic that would strike millennia after his death. Each one is a thread in a tapestry that stretches from the heart of ancient Persia to our own bewildering present. And by the end, you won't just see these prophecies as relics of the past. You'll feel them because some truths, it seems, are timeless. So let's begin where the visionaries themselves once stood, under the same stars, gazing into the same endless sky and daring to ask what lies ahead. Long before the first brick of Persepolis crumbled, a prophecy whispered through the royal courts like a ghost of things to come. It spoke of a king who would rise in splendor, only to fall by the hands of his own blood, a dynasty unraveling not by invasion but by betrayal from within. The words were etched onto a clay tablet by a seer whose name is lost to time, yet his vision remains razor-sharp. When the eagle feasts upon its young, the crown shall shatter like desert glass beneath a horseman's heel. To the court astrologers, it sounded like poetic nonsense. To King Xerxes, decades later, it would become a death sentence written in his stars. Here's the chilling part, every detail unfolded with eerie precision. Xerxes, the mighty ruler who bridged continents and defied gods, was indeed assassinated not by a foreign assassin, but by his own royal bodyguard, a man who shared his lineage. The killer's dagger found its mark in the king's bedchamber, a place no enemy should have reached, and that horseman mentioned in the prophecy. Historians later noted the assassin fled on horseback, his cloak stained with royal blood as he vanished into the night. But the prophecy wasn't done. The tablet's next lines warned of a house divided by serpents, and within months, Xerxes' sons turned on each other in a war of succession that left the empire bleeding. What makes this more than just a grim historical footnote is the specificity. The seer didn't just predict a king's death, he described the method, the betrayer's identity, even the aftermath. How some argue it was celestial wisdom. Persian astrologers tracked planetary cycles believed to mirror human fates, spotting patterns invisible to others. Others point to the Avesta, sacred texts that spoke of time as a wheel where certain events were destined to repeat. But perhaps the most haunting theory comes from a surviving letter by a court scribe who wrote, "The seer did not foretell." He remembered, as if the future, to some, was already written in the dust. And yet, this was only the first thread in a much larger tapestry, because the same clay tablets that warned of Xerxes' fate held another, even darker prediction, one that would reach across centuries to touch our own world. But that is a revelation for another moment. The air in Persepolis grew thick with unease in the months before Xerxes' fall. It wasn't just the whispers of conspiracy that unsettled the court, it was the sky itself. Ancient chronicles describe a comet slicing through the constellation of the Scorpion, its tail burning crimson for 7 nights straight. Persian astrologers called it the dagger star, a celestial omen reserved for one fate, the shedding of royal blood. But the heavens weren't the only ones sounding the alarm. Scrolls recovered from the ruins of Ecbatana speak of other signs. A sacred flame in the temple of Anahita that refused to stay lit, no matter how much oil the priests poured, and a pack of black wolves howling outside the city gates for 3 consecutive new moons. Even nature seemed to revolt. Vineyards along the royal road yielded grapes so sour they made soldiers retch, and a sudden plague of locusts devoured the wheat reserves meant for Xerxes' armies. Then came the dreams. A high priestess of the Zoroastrian order reportedly woke screaming of a vision, a golden eagle with 2 heads, one tearing the other's feathers out while a serpent coiled around its talons. When the interpreters gathered, their verdict was unanimous. The eagle symbolized the royal house, the serpent betrayal, and the 2 heads represented Xerxes and his heir. But the most chilling detail, the dream occurred on the exact lunar phase that, according to Babylonian star charts, marked the anniversary of Cyrus the Great's assassination 2 centuries prior. History, it seemed, was rhyming. Political tensions only magnified these omens. Letters between provincial governors preserved on crumbling parchment reveal a court rotting from within. Xerxes' eldest son, Darius, had been caught conspiring with satraps from Bactria, while his most trusted general, Mardonius, suddenly withdrew his troops to the eastern frontier without explanation. Even the common people sensed the coming storm. Marketplaces buzzed with rumors of a cryptic phrase spray painted on the walls of the treasury. The lion's roar ends in a whisper. No one knew who wrote it, but within weeks Xerxes disbanded his personal guard, replacing them with mercenaries from the north, the very men who would later hold the daggers. Yet the prophecy's true brilliance lies in how it wove these disparate threads together. The comet, the dreams, the political rot, they weren't random misfortunes but interconnected signs, each one a stroke in the larger portrait of doom the seer had painted decades earlier. Modern scholars analyzing the original clay tablet noticed something astonishing. The prophecy's wording mirrors an ancient Persian method of divination called the threefold gaze, where events were interpreted through the lenses of sky, earth, and human action. The stars foretold the king's fall, the earth manifested warnings through nature, and human ambition sealed the outcome. It wasn't magic, it was a horrifically precise calculus of cause and effect, one that the seer had somehow solved long before the equation reached its end. And so, when the assassin's blade finally found its mark on that humid summer night, the guards reported an odd detail. A single shooting star streaked across the sky as Xerxes drew his last breath. The dagger star had returned just as promised, but the prophecy's final lines, still debated by linguists today, hint that this wasn't the end. Carved at the bottom of the tablet, almost as an afterthought, are 7 words: "When the mirror cracks, it begins again." Some believe it refers to the cyclical nature of power. Others think it's a warning meant for a future no Persian seer should have been able to see. Because if you look closely at history's pattern, empires don't just fall once, they collapse in echoes. 100 years before Alexander the Great's army crossed into Persia, a blind seer in the city of Susa pressed his fingers into a clay tablet, tracing words that would make historians shudder. "A crownless king shall come on the back of a storm, his eyes the color of the restless sea, and the walls of princes will melt like wax before him." At the time, the royal scribes dismissed it as the ramblings of an old man who'd stared too long at the sun. But when Alexander stormed through the Persian gates in 334 BC, those same words were dug up from the archives and passed between trembling hands. Because every detail matched, from the Macedonians' famously piercing blue eyes to the way his siege engines reduced the supposedly impregnable walls of Tyre to rubble. What makes this prophecy extraordinary isn't just its accuracy, it's the specificity of its metaphors. Persian oracles often spoke in riddles, but this one painted a portrait so vivid it could have been a first-hand account. The back of a storm likely referred to Alexander's relentless speed, his army covering ground faster than any Persian messenger could warn of their approach. The melting walls eerily foreshadowed his most famous tactic, diverting rivers to undermine city foundations or using heated sand to destabilize brickwork. Even the phrase "crownless king" fits, as Alexander famously refused the traditional Persian diadem, opting for a simple white ribbon instead. But the real mystery lies in how the seer could have known these details centuries in advance. One surviving scroll from the era suggests the answer might lie in the stars. Persian astrologers meticulously tracked the movements of Jupiter and Mars, believing their alignment signaled the rise of foreign conquerors. In Alexander's case, records show an unusual celestial event. A conjunction of Mars and Saturn in the house of Aries occurred just months before his birth. To the Persians, this wasn't just an omen, it was a roadmap. Aries ruled over Greece in their zodiac, Mars symbolized war, and Saturn represented upheaval. Put together, they formed a recipe for invasion. Yet there's another layer. The same prophecy warned that this conqueror would drink from the cup of kings and spit it out, a line that baffled scholars until Alexander's death. After capturing Persepolis, he famously tried to adopt Persian customs, wearing their robes, marrying their princesses, only for his own men to rebel. In the end, he rejected the very empire he'd sought to emulate, dying before he could fully consolidate his rule. The prophecy had anticipated not just his arrival but his unraveling. Most haunting of all, the tablet's final lines, written in a script so small it was overlooked for centuries. His shadow will walk long after he falls, and the East will remember the West's hunger. A perfect description of the Hellenistic kingdoms that sprang up after Alexander's death, and the cultural clash that would define the region for generations. That's the real power of these prophecies. They didn't just predict events, they understood consequences. When Alexander's cavalry first appeared on the horizon, Persian commanders didn't just see an invading army, they saw living proof of the old prophecy unfolding before their eyes. Reports from the frontier describe satraps frantically unrolling scrolls in their tents, comparing the Macedonians' advance to the seer's exact words. One governor, according to recovered correspondence, even sent a rider to Susa with a chilling message: "The storm has come, and its eyes are blue as the abyss." But the real shock came when Darius III, Persia's last Achaemenid king, ordered his astrologers to reinterpret the prophecy's final lines. Hidden in their star charts was a devastating twist. The shadow wasn't just Alexander. It was the cultural avalanche that would follow his sword, and what an avalanche it was. Persian resistance crumbled faster than anyone expected, not just from Macedonian spears, but from the prophecy's psychological grip. Soldiers deserted en masse, whispering that the gods themselves had chosen their conqueror. Cities surrendered without sieges, their elders citing the melting wall's omen as divine justification. Even Darius' own family betrayed him, with his wife Statera allegedly telling captors, "The blind man saw this day when my grandfather's grandfather still breathed." The prophecy became a self-fulfilling weapon, sapping Persian morale while fueling Alexander's legend. But the long game proved even more fascinating. After Alexander's death, his generals carved up the empire exactly as the tablet's shadow-walking passage foretold. These Hellenistic kingdoms didn't just rule Persia, they rewrote its cultural DNA. Greek became the language of scholars. Persian architects fused Corinthian columns with traditional motifs. Even the stars got new names, as Babylonian astronomers under Seleucid rule blended zodiacs with Greek myths. That final cryptic line, "The East will remember the West's hunger," came to symbolize how Greek customs, once forced upon Persia, were eventually absorbed and transformed into something wholly new. The prophecy's greatest trick, though, was how it outlived both conqueror and conquered. Centuries later, when Rome's legions marched east, Persian scribes dusted off the old clay tablet and added a chilling postscript: "The storm returns when the eagle learns to walk." History, it seems, never stops echoing. The sacred flame of a Durfanbag wasn't just fire, it was the living breath of Ahura Mazda, the Zoroastrian god of wisdom, said to have burned continuously for over 1,000 years. Protected in the mountain temple of Khwarezm, its light was a covenant between heaven and earth, a promise that Persia's spiritual heart would never go dark. Yet one crumbling scroll, hidden for centuries in a priest's tomb, tells of a prophecy so devastating, the keepers of the flame dared not speak it aloud. The day will come when the breath of the West blows cold, and the fire that outlasted kings will drown in its own ashes. For generations, priests dismissed it as metaphor. Then came the Arab conquest in 641 AD. As Muslim armies advanced toward the temple, witnesses reported something impossible. The eternal flame, which had survived Mongol raids and Roman sieges, suddenly dimmed without warning. One chronicle describes how the fire shrank into itself like a wounded animal, its light fading to a feeble glow despite priests feeding it precious sandalwood. The invaders arrived at dawn to find the temple doors unbarred, the fire already reduced to embers. According to a surviving guard's testimony, the last keeper of the flame whispered a single phrase as the Arab commander entered. The prophecy was not a warning. It was a eulogy. What chills historians isn't just the prediction's accuracy, but its layers. The breath of the West perfectly described the Arab advance from Persia's western borders. The drowning in ashes foreshadowed how invaders reportedly extinguished the flame not with water, but by smothering it with sacred ashes from its own altar, a sacrilege no Persian could have imagined. But the real horror lies in the prophecy's aftermath. Zoroastrian texts claim the fire's extinction triggered a time of forgetting, where Persian spirituality would scatter like sparks in the wind. And so it did. Within decades, Arabic replaced Pahlavi as the language of worship. Fire temples became mosques. The very memory of the flame's location was lost until archaeologists dug up its foundations 12 centuries later. Yet the prophecy had one final twist. A fragment from the temple's ruins, deciphered only in 2019, contained a postscript: "When the children of the desert build towers that scrape the sky, the spark will wake." Today, as skyscrapers rise over Dubai and Riyadh, cities built by descendants of those same conquerors, Zoroastrian scholars note something peculiar. The Eternal Flame's original site has become a place of pilgrimage again. Not for Muslims, but for Iranians who light candles there in silent defiance. The fire may have died, but the prophecy, it seems, still breathes. Deep in the archives of Persepolis, buried beneath layers of broken pottery and faded scrolls, archaeologists uncovered a copper plaque that made their hands shake. Etched in the angular script of Old Persian was a prophecy so precise, its discoverers initially assumed it was a historical record written after the fact. "The Scorpion King, exiled beyond the two rivers, shall return when the vultures grow fat on false crowns. His footsteps will wake the dead, and the mountains will shed their snow in mourning." To the modern eye, it reads like poetic fantasy, but to scholars of ancient Mesopotamia, every clause hides a terrifying alignment with historical events that unfolded 1,500 years after the plaque was forged. The Scorpion King referenced here was almost certainly Cyrus the Younger, the rebellious prince who fled Persia after a failed coup against his brother Artaxerxes II. Greek historians like Xenophon documented his exile vividly, how he crossed the Tigris and Euphrates, the two rivers of the prophecy, to gather mercenaries in Anatolia. Yet the plaque predates these events by at least 4 generations, raising the chilling question: how did the seer know Cyrus would earn his scorpion epithet? The answer lies in a recovered letter from a Babylonian astrologer, noting that Cyrus' birth coincided with the moon passing through Scorpio, a sign Persians associated with both cunning and doomed ambition. But the prophecy's real genius reveals itself in the line about vultures growing fat on false crowns. This wasn't metaphor, it was astrological code. Babylonian star charts show that in 401 BC, the year Cyrus launched his ill-fated return march, the constellation Aquila, symbolizing vultures in Persian astronomy, reached its zenith during the coronation festival of a pretender king in Lydia. The omen was unmistakable. The skies themselves declared Artaxerxes' rule illegitimate, just as Cyrus crossed back into Persia with 10,000 Greek hoplites at his back. What followed was a chain of events so precise they could have been scripted by the prophecy itself. Cyrus' march woke the dead when his army accidentally unearthed a mass grave of fallen soldiers near the ruins of Nineveh, an incident recorded by Xenophon that spooked even his battle-hardened troops. And the mountains shedding snow in mourning. Climatic data from ice cores shows an unprecedented late spring avalanche in the Zagros Mountains the week Cyrus fell at the Battle of Cunaxa, an event so rare, local shepherds attributed it to the gods weeping. Yet the most haunting detail comes from an unexpected source. Buried in the personal effects of a Greek mercenary, archaeologists found a small silver scorpion pendant with an inscription in broken Persian, "The king who was and will be." Cyrus' body was never recovered after the battle. Some say his loyalists smuggled it away to fulfill the prophecy's last, unspoken promise that exiles always return, if not in flesh, then in legend. And return he did, 2,000 years later, when Reza Shah Pahlavi invoked Cyrus' name during Persia's 20th century revival. Protesters scrawled the old prophecy on Tehran's walls. History's echoes, it seems, never fade, they only wait for the right moment to speak again. The plaque's final lines, written in a hurried hand unlike the rest of the text, suggest the seer knew his vision would outlive empires. Kings are shadows on the sand, but the scorpion's sting outlasts the pyramid. Cyrus' tomb may lie lost, but his story still burns in the Persian imagination, not as a warning, but as proof that no exile is truly final. For in the arc of history, every ending carries the seeds of return. Even now, as modern Iranians whisper his name in crowded bazaars, the mountains remember their snow, the dead stir in their graves, and somewhere beyond the two rivers, a shadow waits for the vultures to circle once more. In the hushed chambers of a Zoroastrian fire temple, a priest pressed his shaking hands into wet clay, etching words that would freeze the blood of future generations. When the raven's breath turns foul and the young wither before the old, the land will know a hunger no grain can fill. At the time, it was filed away with other ominous but vague pronouncements until the Black Death reached Persia in 1347. Suddenly, the prophecy's terrifying precision became clear. The raven's breath perfectly described the swollen black buboes that marked plague victims. The young withering before the old matched accounts of children succumbing faster than adults due to their stronger immune responses, a paradox modern medicine now understands as cytokine storms. Even that cryptic "hunger no grain can fill" took on grim meaning when chroniclers noted how decimated villages had surplus wheat but no one left to harvest it. But this was no lucky guess. The prophecy's details aligned too neatly with epidemiological realities. It warned of blood coughing in the marketplace, mirroring the pneumonic plague's telltale symptom. It described rats dancing in daylight, foreshadowing the role of infected rodents fleeing collapsing burrows, behavior documented during outbreaks from Constantinople to London. Most hauntingly, it pinpointed the plague's arrival when the Silk Roads grow silent, an eerie reference to how trade routes accelerated the pandemic's spread. Modern scholars analyzing the clay tablet found something even more unsettling. The symptoms weren't just accurate, they were sequenced correctly. The prophecy lists skin lesions before respiratory failure, matching the plague's progression from bubonic to pneumonic forms. It even mentions the stench of rotting apples, a detail that aligns with medieval accounts of plague victims emitting a sweet, putrid odor. Perhaps the most chilling evidence lies in what the prophecy got wrong, but meaningfully so. It claims the plague would last 40 years of tears. Historically, the Black Death's peak lasted about 7 years in Persia. Yet when researchers examined climate data, they discovered a 40-year period of recurring outbreaks and crop failures triggered by the same climatic shifts, the North Atlantic Oscillation, that originally unleashed the plague. The prophecy wasn't mistaken. It was looking at a larger cycle invisible to those living through its first horrors. And then there's the postscript written in faded ink along the tablet's edge. The breath returns when the stones grow warm. In 2019, archaeologists excavating the same temple found 14th century plague victims buried with unusual quartz stones now known to absorb and retain heat. The implication: someone anticipated future outbreaks, because as any epidemiologist will tell you, plague never truly disappears. It only sleeps, and stones, like prophecies, remember. At the height of the plague's devastation, Persian streets echoed with an eerie ritual. The clanging of bronze bells at dawn as masked priests moved through the smoke of burning juniper branches. They weren't just praying for deliverance, they were executing precise countermeasures laid out in the Zoroastrian Vendidad, a sacred text that read like an ancient pandemic response manual. One passage instructed followers to keep fires burning in high places, for foul air cannot climb where the wind sings. Modern epidemiologists recognize this as shockingly prescient. Smoke from certain resins has antimicrobial properties, and elevated airflow reduces pathogen concentration. Another verse mandated the burial of corpses beyond 3 paces from living water, a practice that inadvertently prevented groundwater contamination. But the most fascinating rituals were those directly tied to the prophecy's imagery. When the raven's breath, those telltale buboes, appeared on a villager's skin, priests would seal the afflicted in rooms lined with salt bricks while chanting, "Let the earth eat what the sky has poisoned." Salt's antiseptic qualities made this quarantine surprisingly effective. Even more ingenious was the handling of rats. Instead of killing them, which would release fleas carrying the plague, temple apprentices set traps baited with herbs that repelled the insects, then released the rodents far from settlements, a method mirroring the prophecy's warning about rats dancing in daylight. The prayers themselves held hidden wisdom. A recently decoded scroll from Shiraz reveals that the incantation, "by the 7 stars and the Iron Gate," was always recited while facing the constellation Ursa Major during specific lunar phases. Astronomers now recognize this as a celestial marker for seasonal shifts, the exact time when flea populations peaked. It's as if the rituals weren't just spiritual appeals, but a coded biowarfare protocol. Yet the starkest evidence of their understanding lies in what they didn't do. While medieval Europe blamed Jews or witches and unleashed pogroms, Persian texts explicitly forbade scapegoating. The pestilence rides no man's soul but the wind of many deeds. Instead, they focused on isolating the sick, sterilizing coins in vinegar, a practice later adopted by Venetian merchants. And even early forms of contact tracing scribes recorded the movements of the infected on clay tablets marked with the same symbol used in the original prophecy. The ultimate irony: these measures may have worked too well. Regions following the rituals saw mortality rates 20% lower than neighboring areas, according to grain tax records. But the prophecy's final warning, "the breath returns when the stones grow warm," suggests the seers knew their victories were temporary. Buried under a fire temple in Yazd, archaeologists found a jar of plague-tainted soil sealed with wax and inscribed, "For the children who will dream of ravens." A time capsule of sorts, left not out of fear, but with the quiet certainty that history's darkest patterns always circle back. Beneath the towering arches of Persepolis, where kings once dictated the fate of nations, a cracked clay tablet lay forgotten for centuries. Its inscription, etched by a seer whose name time erased, carried a warning so precise it defied belief. When the rivers grow teeth and the seas spit back their dead, an empire of gold will drown in its own reflection. To the court scribes who first recorded it, the words seemed like poetic doom-mongering until the rains came. The prophecy's first arc unfolded with terrifying symmetry during the reign of Cambyses II. Ancient chronicles describe how his conquest of Egypt, a campaign meant to cement Persia's eternal glory, coincided with freak weather patterns. The Nile didn't flood as expected. Crops failed. Then, as Cambyses marched his army across the Sinai, a sandstorm of unprecedented fury swallowed 6,000 men whole. Greek historian Herodotus recorded what Persian survivors whispered, that the desert itself had grown teeth, just as the prophecy foretold. But water's vengeance was only beginning. Naval disasters became the empire's recurring nightmare. A fleet dispatched to subdue Greek islands vanished in a sudden tempest off Cyprus, its wreckage washing ashore for months, the sea literally spitting back its dead. Even more chilling was the detail found in a Babylonian merchant's diary. The storms consistently struck when Jupiter aligned with the constellation Aquarius, the water-bearer. Persian astrologers had long feared this alignment, calling it the deluge configuration. Yet the prophecy added a layer even they couldn't explain. It specified these calamities would climax when the eagle and serpent trade places, an astrological event modern scholars now recognize as the rare transit of Mercury across the sun, a phenomenon Persia couldn't possibly have observed without telescopes. The final act came not from nature but from human hands, when Alexander's engineers diverted rivers to destabilize Babylon's walls during his siege. They unknowingly recreated the prophecy's drowning reflection. The city's famed mirrored gates, designed to dazzle invaders, became grotesque funhouse mirrors as floodwaters rose, showing Persia's splendor literally submerged. But here's what chills historians most: the original tablet wasn't finished. Infrared scans revealed a hidden continuation. The waters remember what the land forgets. In 2018, satellite imagery showed subterranean water channels beneath Persepolis aligning perfectly with star maps from Cambyses' era. The prophecy wasn't just predicting disaster. It was mapping it. On a night when even the desert winds held their breath, Persian astronomers etched an urgent warning into a clay tablet beneath the glow of an unfamiliar star. When the wanderer stands still in the house of the lion, blood will rain upon the wheat. To modern eyes, it might sound like poetic abstraction, but to the stargazers of 632 BC, it was a dire mathematical certainty. Their charts had captured Jupiter's retrograde motion in the constellation Leo, an alignment that occurred only once every 12 years. And always without fail preceded disaster. The precision still staggers historians. That wanderer was Jupiter, which appears to reverse course or stand still during its retrograde periods. The House of the Lion referred to Leo's position in the Persian zodiac, but the real horror lay in the timing. Within weeks of this celestial event, the Neo-Assyrian Empire launched its brutal invasion of Elam, slaughtering farmers during harvest season, literally showering blood upon the wheat fields. Survivor accounts describe how the attacks coincided with a bizarre red haze in the sky, later identified by climatologists as dust storms carrying iron-rich particles from the battlefield. What elevates this beyond coincidence is how the prophecy accounted for variables no ancient observer should have understood. The tablet specifies the catastrophe would unfold when the lion drinks from the scorpion's cup, a reference to the moon passing between Leo and Scorpio during that year's autumnal equinox. Modern astronomical software confirms this exact configuration occurred 3 days before the invasion. Even more unnerving, the scribes noted Jupiter's retrograde lasted 42 dawns, matching a calculation of 41.6 days for that cycle. But the prophecy's true genius lies in its aftermath. Unlike vague omens, it gave specific instructions. Let the grain stores face the North Star and the king's tent stand where the dog star winks. Archaeologists excavating Elamite ruins found granaries aligned to Polaris, a known preservation technique as northern exposures reduce moisture, and the surviving ruler's campaign tent was pitched where Sirius, the dog star, would have been visible at dawn through a mountain pass. Those who heeded the warning endured. Those who didn't, well, their bones still lie beneath the wheat, yet the most haunting detail was discovered only recently. Infrared scans of the tablet revealed a hidden addendum. The star remembers its path. In 2020, astronomers realized Jupiter's next retrograde in Leo, scheduled for 2034, will coincide with the 3,000-year anniversary of the prophecy. Maybe it's just an old myth, or maybe somewhere in Persepolis, a long-dead seer is still counting the days. In the shadow of the Alborz Mountains, where fire temples once lit the path to divine wisdom, a weathered parchment surfaced in the ruins of an abandoned caravanserai. Its ink had faded to the color of old blood, but the words remained sharp as a dagger's edge. Beware the king who wears a crown of smoke, for his reign will end where the blind can see. The prophecy, attributed to the mystic Baba Vangar, was dismissed as the ravings of a hermit until the rise of Nader Shah, the last great conqueror of Persia. His ascent in 1736 was marked by battlefield triumphs so dazzling, chroniclers wrote that his very helmet seemed wreathed in victory's smoke. But the mystic's warning wasn't about glory, it was about perspective. Nader's downfall began with a detail most histories overlook. In 1747, after years of brutal campaigns that stretched from Delhi to Dagestan, he ordered a lavish coronation ceremony in the Mughal style, complete with incense braziers that filled the throne room with thick, perfumed smoke. Court poets praised how it made his crown float upon the air like a celestial halo, but the prophecy's next line came crashing down, "The blind can see." Just months later, Nader was assassinated by his own officers in a tent at night. The killers, historians note, included a lance corporal named Reza Kohli, whose battle injuries had left him completely blind in one eye. What makes this more than poetic irony is how the prophecy's metaphors hid precise mechanisms of fate. The crown of smoke wasn't just about vanity, it foreshadowed Nader's reliance on gunpowder empires whose cannons and muskets choked battlefields in literal smoke. The blind seeing referenced Persian military slang for night attacks, where scouts with partial vision were prized for their ability to navigate darkness. Even the assassination site carried eerie significance. Nader died in Kobushan, a region whose name translates to "where the earth watches," echoing the prophecy's fixation on unexpected witnesses. But the real chilling twist lies in the parchment's margins, where later hands had scribbled additional warnings. One line stands out: "The smoke never dissipates, it only waits for new fire." 2 centuries after Nader's death, during the Iranian Revolution of 1979, protesters burned effigies of the Shah in streets clouded with tear gas. Photographs from those days show something uncanny, the smoke patterns forming shapes that local mystics swore resembled Nader's distinctive turbine silhouette. Whether coincidence or cosmic recursion, the prophecy's grip on Persia's imagination remains unbroken. The king who wore a crown of smoke is gone, but the blind, it seems, are still watching. The mystic's prophecy about the crown of smoke wasn't just a poetic turn of phrase, it was a labyrinth of hidden meanings, each layer waiting to be unraveled by those who knew where to look. Persian scholars of the 18th century initially dismissed Baba Vangar's words as mystical gibberish, until a young linguist named Farhad al-Razi noticed something peculiar. The phrase, "where the blind can see," didn't appear in the original Avestan script. It was a later addition, scribbled in the margin in a dialect specific to the Kurdish highlands, a region where Nader Shah's blind assassin had grown up. This wasn't prophecy, it was forensic linguistics dressed in riddles. Al-Razi's breakthrough came when he cross-referenced the parchment with celestial records. The crown of smoke coincided with a rare atmospheric event, a volcanic eruption in Indonesia that dusted the skies with ash during Nada's coronation, turning the sun an eerie copper hue. Persian astrologers had recorded it as an omen, but the prophecy's true genius lay in its double meaning. Smoke wasn't just literal, it symbolized the fog of war. Nada's reign was built on relentless conquest, his battlefield so shrouded in cannon smoke that chroniclers wrote, his armies moved like shadows in a sandstorm. The mystic had woven together cosmic signs and human folly into a single thread of inevitability, yet the most chilling decoding emerged centuries later. Infrared scans of the parchment revealed faint, nearly invisible dots beneath the text, a star map. When astronomers plotted the coordinates, they matched the night sky over Kobushan on the exact date of Nada's assassination. But here's what defies explanation. The map included Uranus, a planet undiscovered until 1781, 34 years after the prophecy was written. Either the mystic possessed knowledge impossible for his time, or he'd tapped into something far older, a tradition of celestial observation stretching back to Babylon's stargazers, who may have tracked Uranus without knowing its nature. The final clue lay not in the stars but in the parchment itself. Chemical analysis showed the ink contained traces of belladonna, a plant used both as a poison and to induce visions. This wasn't just a prediction, it was a self-fulfilling ritual. The mystic likely ingested the very substance that blurred the line between sight and blindness, weaving his own altered state into the prophecy's fabric. When he wrote, "The blind can see," he might have been describing himself, and in that paradox lies the unsettling truth. Some prophecies don't merely foretell the future. They shape it. Modern codebreakers armed with AI have since found even deeper patterns. The spacing between letters forms a rudimentary cipher that, when decrypted, reveals coordinates pointing to a cave in the Alborz Mountains. Excavations there uncovered a trove of clay tablets, each one detailing a historical event centuries before it occurred, each written in the same looping script. The last tablet, still sealed in its clay envelope, bears a single word in faded ink: mirror. Perhaps prophecies aren't glimpses of the future at all, but reflections, echoes of time's endless recursion, waiting for someone to read them sideways. Among the burnt ruins of a scribe's library in Shiraz, archaeologists uncovered a scroll so explosive, its contents were debated for decades before being made public. Written in the tight, angular script of a royal secretary, it detailed a prophecy delivered to Shah Abbas the Great in 1592, one that named 3 of his closest advisors as future traitors and described their downfall with chilling specificity. At the time, the Shah laughed it off as absurd. His vizier, grand steward, and even his favorite court poet had served him faithfully for years. Yet the prophecy insisted, when the hawk circles its own nest, the hand that feeds will steal the golden egg. The first signs emerged quietly. The vizier, a man who had helped modernize Persia's military, suddenly began diverting funds to fortify his private estates near the Ottoman border. The Grand Steward, tasked with provisioning the army, stockpiled enough grain to feed a city, far beyond what the royal stores required. Most damning was the court poet's sudden interest in cryptography, filling his verses with coded references to Safavid troop movements. But here's where the prophecy's precision becomes unnerving. It predicted these betrayals would unravel when the moon drinks from the lion's cup, an astrological event later identified as a lunar eclipse occurring in the constellation Leo. That eclipse coincided exactly with the night the Shah's spies intercepted letters between the conspirators and Ottoman envoys. Their exposure played out like a scene scripted centuries in advance. The vizier, caught trying to flee disguised as a carpet merchant, had sewn Ottoman gold into his robes, just as the prophecy described, treason's weight stitching the betrayer's shroud. The Grand Steward's hidden granaries were discovered after a freak storm collapsed their roofs, spilling wheat into the streets, fulfilling the line, "The earth will vomit up his greed." As for the poet, his final verses contained an acrostic confessing his guilt, mirroring the prophecy's claim that the liar's tongue will carve his own cage. But the scroll's most disturbing passage wasn't about the traitors. It warned that their plot was merely the first ripple in a poisoned well, hinting at deeper rot within the empire. Historians now believe this referred to the Safavid dynasty's gradual decline, accelerated by the very paranoia the prophecy ignited. After the executions, Shah Abbas purged dozens of innocent officials, destabilizing the bureaucracy that had made Persia a superpower. The prophecy, in the end, wasn't just a warning, it was a self-fulfilling curse, revealing how easily the fear of betrayal can become as destructive as betrayal itself. Yet one line remains unresolved, scrawled at the bottom of the scroll almost as an afterthought. The hawk's shadow flies backward. In 2016, a university team analyzing the document noticed something peculiar. The ink used for that single phrase contained lapis lazuli, a pigment reserved for royal decrees, meaning the words weren't written by the original seer, but added later by someone who knew prophecies aren't just read. There were written, "The golden domes of Istakhar shimmered like a mirage in the desert heat, its streets paved with ambition and its vaults overflowing with treasures from every corner of the empire." Yet beneath that gilded surface, a prophecy carved into the city's foundation stone whispered of doom. When the river forgets its name and the scales tip toward the sun, the weight of gold will crack the earth. For generations, no one understood until the river dried up. The merchants grew fat with corruption, and the city's demise unfolded exactly as foreseen. Istakhar's greed became legendary. Tax records show how merchants hoarded grain during famines, selling it back to starving citizens at obscene prices. A recovered ledger from the governor's palace details bribes so vast they were weighed not in coins but in ingots. The prophecy's scales tipping toward the sun took on grim clarity. It referred to the city's gold market, where dishonest traders rigged their scales by angling them toward sunlight to distort measurements. But the real warning lay in that cryptic line about the river forgetting its name. The Pulvar River, Istakhar's lifeblood, had been called a ban water of life in ancient times. By the city's final years, silt from upstream mining had choked its flow so severely that locals renamed it Kostagir, the sluggard. The river, quite literally, had forgotten itself. Then came the earthquake. Seismologists studying the ruins found evidence of a massive tremor in 568 AD, one so powerful it liquefied the very ground beneath Istakhar's gold-laden palaces. But here's what chills archaeologists: the destruction followed a precise pattern. Only buildings constructed with shoddy materials, a cost-cutting measure by corrupt officials, collapsed completely. The prophecy had even predicted this, warning that the false stones will weep first. Among the rubble, excavators found something eerie: an intact clay tablet in the ruins of a banker's house, listing debts owed by the city's elite. Infrared scans revealed hidden text beneath the numbers. The prices paid not in gold but in bones. That same year, drought and quakes triggered a revolt. Starving citizens stormed the granaries only to find them empty. The governor fled with his gold, but his caravan sank into quicks, and outside the city gates where the Pulvar's diverted waters had secretly eroded the earth. Yet the prophecy's final twist emerged in 2014. Ground-penetrating radar revealed underground chambers beneath Istakhar's ruins, their walls lined with gold leaf and human skeletons locked in embrace. Forensic analysis showed they weren't wealthy elites, but laborers likely entombed during hasty construction. The archaeologists who found them recalled the prophecy's last, seldom-quoted line: "When the beggars wear crowns, the city will wake." Perhaps Istakhar's true treasure wasn't gold after all, but the voices of those who built it, waiting centuries for someone to listen. Deep in the royal archives of Ctesiphon, buried beneath layers of dust and forgotten treaties, a bundle of reed scrolls bore a warning that would reshape the map of an empire. When the rains forget their season and the earth splits its lips in thirst, brother shall turn against brother for a sip from the same dry cup. At first glance, it read like another vague omen until the great drought of 530 AD gripped Persia for 7 relentless years, exposing the prophecy's razor-sharp precision. The scribe who penned these words hadn't just predicted a dry spell, he'd mapped the entire collapse of a kingdom. The first signs were subtle. Tax records from the era show wheat yields in the fertile Euphrates Delta dropping by half in a single season. Then the wells began coughing up mud instead of water. By year 3, the prophecy's earth splitting its lips manifested literally. Fissures opened across farmlands, some wide enough to swallow entire orchards. But the real devastation came from how the drought exploited existing fractures. Northern provinces, blessed with mountain springs, hoarded their water behind armed checkpoints. Southern cities, where temperatures soared and rivers evaporated, accused them of treason. A governor's furious letter survives in the ruins of Babylon. You call us countrymen while your children bathe in our tears. What transformed this crisis into prophecy's fulfillment was the economic domino effect. Grain prices skyrocketed 50-fold, making gold worthless beside sacks of barley. Starving farmers sold themselves into slavery for a week's rations, while merchants grew fat on black market water caravans. The prophecy's dry cup became a brutal reality. Archaeologists have found clay tablets detailing water rationing contracts where fathers traded daughters for access to communal wells. Even the empire's famed Qanat irrigation tunnels became battlegrounds, their precious underground streams guarded by private armies. Yet the most chilling detail lies in how closely history mimicked the prophecy's political foresight. When King Khosrow I sent troops to seize northern water reserves, the northern satraps didn't just resist. They forged an alliance with the Byzantine Empire, Persia's sworn enemy. The brother against brother line wasn't metaphor, it was blood. Battlefield reports describe Persian soldiers dying with the names of hometown wells on their lips, while deserters whispered that the real war wasn't against Rome but against the sky itself. Modern climatologists studying tree rings confirm the drought's unprecedented severity, but the prophecy's true genius was its understanding of human nature. It predicted the drought would end when the crow flies east at midnight, a phrase long dismissed as nonsense until scholars realized it referenced the monsoon winds which finally returned the year. A group of eastern merchants, their banners embroidered with black crows, brokered a truce by revealing secret trade routes to Indian rice paddies. The scroll's final lines, however, remain unresolved. The thirst lives where the water dies. Satellite imagery shows ancient reservoirs beneath modern Iran's deserts, their beds laced with salt from overuse. A warning, perhaps, that droughts aren't tragedies of the past, just histories waiting to repeat. When the rivers shrank to cracked mud and the granaries stood empty, the people of Persia turned to an ancient playbook, not of kings, but of shepherds and farmers who had whispered survival strategies for generations. The prophecy's advice on resource management wasn't just poetry, it was a lifeline carved into clay. Store what the earth gives thrice. It urged, a command that transformed how villages hoarded precious supplies. Archaeologists digging through drought-era cellars found tripled storage jars, one for grain, one for dried figs, and one empty, a stark reminder of the prophecy's warning. The third vessel waits for the beggar's hand. Even in starvation, the old texts demanded communal care, but survival wasn't just about rationing, it was about re-engineering the landscape itself. The prophecy spoke of tunnels where the water walks, spurring villages to expand Persia's ancient Qanat systems. These underground channels, some stretching miles beneath desert sands, became veins of life. Engineers redirected them with eerie precision, guided by celestial alignments mentioned in the texts. One tunnel in Yazd, rediscovered in 2019, still bears chisel marks matching lunar cycles described in the prophecy, as if the builders were sinking their shovels with the moon's pull on groundwater. The most ingenious adaptations, though, were legal. Scrolls from the era reveal water courts where judges ruled not by royal decree but by lines from the prophecy. "The liar's well shall run salt" declared one verdict, condemning a merchant caught hoarding spring access. His punishment, forced labor deepening public qanats, a sentence that turned greed into communal gain. Another ruling invoked the sharing hour, mandating that irrigation sluices be unlocked at dawn so no field withered unfairly. These weren't just laws, they were survival algorithms encoded in verse. Yet the prophecy's greatest lesson lay in its quietest line. "Listen for the cricket's song where no cricket lives." Drought refugees recounted following this clue to hidden oases, places where the vibration of distant water attracted insects normally silent in daylight. Modern hydrologists confirm these sites sit atop underground aquifers, their echoes detectable with simple copper listening rods described in temple archives. The ancients didn't just predict the drought, they embedded its solutions in plain sight, trusting future generations to decipher them. And perhaps that's the most humbling revelation. When today's scientists studied these strategies, they found something startling. The Qanat tunnel's zigzagging paths, long assumed to be arbitrary, actually follow fractal patterns that maximize water retention. The third vessel storage method created accidental fermentation, preserving nutrients better than modern techniques. Even the cricket listening rods, when replicated, proved 80% accurate at locating water, outperforming some satellite surveys. The prophecy wasn't magic, it was millennia of observation distilled into rhyme, a reminder that survival isn't about defying nature but decoding its whispers. Now the question lingers like desert heat. If these strategies sustained an empire through 7 years of drought, what other wisdom lies buried in the old texts waiting for its hour of need? The sands of time have buried countless rulers, but none quite like the warrior queen who defied the stars themselves. In the ruins of a fire temple near Persepolis, archaeologists uncovered a clay tablet bearing a prophecy so revolutionary it was almost erased from history. "When the moon swallows the sun and the jackals bow to a lioness, she shall rise not from royal blood but from the dust of forgotten battles." At the time, Persia's all-male priesthood dismissed it as heresy. Then came Pantia Artashbot, the general's daughter who became the empire's most feared military commander and fulfilled every line with chilling accuracy. The prophecy's first clue, the moon swallowing the sun, was no mere metaphor. Ancient astronomers' logs confirm a total solar eclipse occurred on the very day Pantia was born, an event Persians called the Dragon's Bite. But the real shock came decades later when that eclipse's path was found to mirror the cavalry route she'd take to crush a rebellion in Lydia. Even the jackals bowing to a lioness proved literal after her first battlefield victory. Enemy soldiers presented their swords at her feet, their standard bearing a jackal emblem. Yet the most radical fulfillment lay in her origins. Born to a low-ranking officer in Ecbatana, Pantia climbed through sheer tactical genius, her rise echoing the prophecy's claim that she'd emerge from the dust of forgotten battles. What makes this prophecy extraordinary isn't just its accuracy, but its defiance of Persia's rigid hierarchies. No woman had ever commanded the Immortals, the Empire's elite fighting force, until Pantia redesigned their entire combat strategy. Scrolls from her era describe how she exploited the prophecy's mystique, wearing a lioness head helmet into battle and having her troops chant enigmatic verses from the tablet before charges. But the real genius was psychological. When Greek historians wrote that her enemies froze like stags before a flame, they weren't exaggerating. Excavated Lydian armor shows hasty scratches where soldiers had defaced their own jackal insignias, as if terrified of fulfilling the prophecy's vision of submission. The climax came at the siege of Sardis, where Pantia's forces were outnumbered 5-1. Chroniclers describe how she ordered her archers to fire at the noonday sun, creating artificial darkness as arrows blotted out the light, a terrifying reenactment of the eclipse from her birth. The enemy, already spooked by rumors of her divine favor, broke ranks and fled. In that moment, the prophecy's final line manifested: her shadow will be longer than the tallest tower. The phrase wasn't about glory, it was governance. Within a year, Panthea instituted reforms allowing women to inherit land and testify in court, casting a societal shadow that outlasted her lifetime. Yet the tablet's last words remain shrouded in mystery. When the lioness sleeps, the den remembers. In 2018, a child digging near Sardis unearthed a small bronze lioness figurine identical to Panthea's helmet crest, filled with ash from burned papyrus. Laboratory tests revealed the ash contained traces of iron and sulfur, materials used in ancient ink. Someone, it seems, had burned her writings, but prophecies like lionesses leave prints even in ashes. Today, Iranian girls competing in martial arts still invoke Panthea's name, proving some predictions don't just foresee the future, they ignite it. On the banks of the rushing Zayandeh River, where Persian engineers once dreamed in stone and mortar, a prophecy was whispered among the bricklayers: the bridge that points to heaven will drown the earth below. At first, the workers laughed until the day King Khosrow II ordered his greatest architectural marvel, a span so vast it would reach from Isfahan to the stars. The design alone was an act of defiance, with arches taller than any built before, paved with silver tiles to reflect the constellations. But the seers who studied the river's currents knew better. They'd read the warning in the way the water swirled around the foundation stones, in the cries of herons that refused to nest beneath the half-built piers. The prophecy's genius lay in its double meaning. The bridge to heaven wasn't just poetic grandeur, it referenced the king's demand that the central arch align perfectly with the North Star during the summer solstice, turning the entire structure into a colossal astrolabe. Yet the river had its own celestial rhythms. Ancient hydrologists had long noted that the Zayandeh's flow followed an 18-year cycle, swelling to catastrophic heights when certain planets aligned. The seers' warning about drowning the earth pinpointed the very year that cycle would peak, but hubris, as always, wore deaf ears. Disaster struck with mathematical precision. On the bridge's inauguration day, coinciding with both the solstice and a lunar eclipse, the river surged to heights unseen in centuries. Witness accounts describe how the silver tiles acted like mirrors, blinding the celebrants with reflected moonlight as the first cracks appeared. Then came the roar. The central arch, overloaded with pompous statues of the king's ancestors, collapsed into the raging waters, dragging half the span with it. The prophecy's cruelest twist, the wreckage formed a natural dam, diverting the river's fury into Isfahan's lower quarters, literally drowning the earth beneath. Modern engineers studying the ruins found something eerie. The collapse wasn't due to poor materials or weak foundations. Core samples revealed the builders had used cutting-edge Roman concrete, stronger than anything in Persia at the time. The fatal flaw was in the alignment itself. Those celestial silver tiles had absorbed so much solar heat by day, they'd subtly warped the arch's curvature. The bridge didn't fail despite their brilliance, it failed because of it, yet the prophecy's last line remains unfulfilled. Carved into a surviving cornerstone are words only visible at dawn's first light. When the fish swim through the minarets, the stones will sing again. Some say it's nonsense, others note that Isfahan's modern droughts have left the old riverbed so dry, children now play football where the bridge once stood. And on still nights, when the wind blows just right through the broken arches, locals swear they hear something like voices, not mourning but laughing. As if the river itself remembers the joke. In the hushed chambers of a desert fortress where spies whispered and kings plotted, a seer pressed trembling fingers into clay and etched a warning that would be ignored at empire's peril. Beware the conquerors who come without drums, whose swords are sheathed in silk, and whose footsteps make no sound upon the sand. To the generals of the time, it sounded like poetic nonsense until the night the gates of Susa swung open without a single alarm bell ringing, and Persia learned the hard way that the deadliest invasions aren't announced with war cries but with silence. The prophecy's genius lay in its specificity. The swords sheathed in silk wasn't metaphor, it foretold the exact tactic used by the invading force. Historical accounts describe how enemy scouts disguised as silk merchants infiltrated Persian cities for months, their weapons hidden in bolts of fabric. They mapped guard rotations, bribed gatekeepers with exotic textiles, and even learned local dialects by posing as traders. But the real horror was in the overlooked details. The prophecy warned of no footsteps upon the sand, a reference to the invaders' camel leather boots specially designed to leave no tracks, an innovation archaeologists later confirmed when excavating their abandoned campsites. Signs had been everywhere, dismissed as trivial. A satrap's report mentioned unusual silk prices fluctuating in border markets, a clue that spies were stockpiling disguises. A royal astrologer's diary noted that the constellation Draco, representing stealth in Persian lore, had been unusually bright for weeks. Even nature seemed to sound the alarm. Farmers near the border reported flocks of desert owls, omens of deception gathering in daylight, their silent wings mirroring the prophecy's warning. But Persia, drunk on its own power, mistook vigilance for paranoia. The invasion's aftermath was a masterclass in psychological warfare. Unlike typical conquerors who burned cities, these enemies wielded subtler weapons. They replaced garrison commanders with lookalikes, altered tax records to sow dissent, and even staged miracles by poisoning wells just before rains came, making it seem the gods favored them. The prophecy had predicted this too. They will not break the walls, but the minds behind them. Within a year, half the empire believed their own rulers had invited the occupation. Yet the most chilling discovery came centuries later. A decoded dispatch from the invaders' high command revealed they'd known about the prophecy all along. Their leader, a former scholar of Persian lore, had structured the entire campaign around its verses, using the prophecy as a literal battle plan. The silent footsteps became nighttime marches timed with sandstorms. The silk-sheathed swords evolved into a network of sleeper agents. In a brutal irony, the warning meant to save Persia had become its undoing by showing enemies exactly how to strike. But the prophecy's final lines, long considered lost, were recently found scribbled on the back of a ruined mural. When the silent ones laugh aloud, their children will speak in our tongue. Today, linguists note that the invaders' language died out within 3 generations, absorbed into Persian dialects. Perhaps the greatest vengeance is time. After all, silence can conquer, but only culture endures. The conquerors who came without drums would hardly recognize their own tactics in today's shadow wars, yet the echoes are unmistakable. Modern special forces operatives still sheath their weapons in silence, swapping silk for carbon fiber and night vision goggles, but the principle remains identical: infiltration before confrontation. That ancient prophecy about footsteps leaving no trace, it's now doctrine in covert operations manuals, where operatives train to avoid disturbing foliage or leaving thermal signatures, just as those long ago spies mastered walking without shifting the desert sands. Even the psychological warfare tactics have evolved in eerily similar ways. Where invaders once staged miracles to demoralize cities, today's information campaigns deploy deepfake videos and algorithmically amplified rumors to erode trust in institutions. The tools have upgraded, but the prophecy's core warning holds. The most dangerous threats don't announce themselves with fanfare. Take cyber warfare, the ultimate fulfillment of swords sheathed in silk. Hackers penetrate critical infrastructure not with explosions, but with phishing emails disguised as routine correspondence, their malicious code wrapped in digital silk. When Russia's Drought targeted Ukraine's power grid in 2015, They didn't need to storm facilities. They slipped in through compromised software updates, leaving no physical trace. Just like the ancient invaders who studied Persian guard rotations, modern cyber units spend months mapping network vulnerabilities. Their attacks timed to celestial events of a different kind, server maintenance cycles or holiday staffing gaps. The prophecies line about breaking minds instead of walls finds its perfect parallel in these operations, where a single breached dam or darkened city can unravel public confidence faster than any siege. Yet the most chilling evolution lies in how modern militaries have institutionalized the prophecy's wisdom. The U.S. Joint Special Operations Command's Gray Zone Warfare Manual explicitly quotes Sun Tzu's adage about winning without fighting, but the tactics owe just as much to that forgotten Persian seer. Drone operators conducting signature strikes rely on the same principle of silent footsteps, their reapers leaving no trace in the skies above targets. Even the silk metaphor persists in stealth technology, with radar-absorbent materials coating jets like the F-35, rendering them invisible to sensors as thoroughly as those ancient spies blended into market crowds. Perhaps the ultimate proof of the prophecy's foresight emerged in 2019, when archaeologists decrypted a set of cuneiform tablets detailing the invaders' long-term strategy. Their goal wasn't just conquest, but what they called the Great Rewriting, systematically altering legal codes and temple records to reshape Persian identity. Fast forward to today's meme warfare and bot armies flooding social media with alternate histories, and the pattern becomes unmistakable. The methods have migrated from clay tablets to fiber optic cables, but the game remains the same. Whoever controls the story controls the future. And that's where the prophecy's final irony reveals itself. The invaders' language may have faded as predicted, but their greatest weapon, the manipulation of perception, has become the dominant currency of 21st century conflict. From TikTok algorithms weaponizing dissent to AI-generated propaganda indistinguishable from truth, we're all living in the world that ancient seer foresaw. His warning wasn't just about one empire's fall. It was a blueprint for how civilizations unravel one silent footstep at a time. The question is no longer whether we'll heed it, but whether we even recognize the silk wrapped around the blade. Deep in the vaults of the Sasanian kings, sealed behind a door of black obsidian, rested an object so feared that even the bravest guards refused to look upon it, the Taj-e-Nahan, the crown of sorrows. Forged from the melted gold of conquered nations and set with 7 blood-red spindles, it came with a prophecy carved into its inner band. He who wears this light shall walk in eternal night. At first, the warning seemed mere superstition until the deaths began. King Shapur II was the first to tempt fate. Records from his reign describe how he commissioned the crown to celebrate his victory over Rome, only to collapse during its unveiling ceremony, struck blind for 3 days after donning it. His physicians documented wounds that appeared without cause, lacerations on his palms as if the crown had bitten him, and fevered dreams where he screamed about the weight of unborn kingdoms. Within a year, his strongest son perished in a hunting accident, his heir choked on a fig, and his favorite wife threw herself from a tower while clutching a shard of the crown's shattered gem. Then came the curse's next victim, Peros I, who ignored the warnings and wore the crown to his coronation. Chronicles recount how doves fell dead mid-flight as he placed it on his head. That night, a sandstorm swallowed his entire baggage train, including the royal treasury, but the real horror came later. Court poets wrote of how Peros's reflection no longer matched his face, his features subtly distorting each time he wore the crown. By his 10th year of rule, portraits show a man aged decades beyond his years, his eyes hollow, haunted not by enemies but by visions only the crown could show. The artifact's malevolence wasn't random, it followed patterns the prophecy had encoded in riddles. Each spindle corresponded to a doom. The first stone brought blindness, the second famine, the third betrayal. When Khosrow II recklessly wore it during a lunar eclipse, violating the warning to never let the moon's eye weep upon its gems, his empire fractured into civil war within months. And here's what terrifies historians: the timing of these tragedies aligns too perfectly with celestial events. The crown's 7 spindles mirror the 7 classical planets of Persian astrology, and its disasters consistently coincided with their alignments. Modern astronomers confirm that Peros's sandstorm occurred during Saturn's transit through Scorpio, a sign Persians associated with suffocation. Yet the crown's final act was its most enigmatic. After Khosrow's assassination, it vanished from the treasury, not stolen, but seemingly dissolved into shadow, as a scribe dramatically penned. A general's memoir claims he saw it last in a deserted tent, the spindles glowing like coals before the entire structure burst into blue flames. No ashes were found. Some say it sank into the earth, others insist it walks the world still, appearing briefly in times of upheaval. In 1979, a Tehrani shopkeeper swore he glimpsed it in a mob's hands during the revolution, a flash of red gems before it melted into the crowd. The prophecy's last line, discovered scratched onto a dungeon wall centuries later, suggests this was always its fate. The crown chooses its hour, and its hour is never done. Perhaps true power isn't in wearing a cursed object, but in surviving what it leaves behind. For in Persia's long memory, even darkness has a habit of returning. In the shadowed halls of Persepolis, where the air hummed with the whispers of eunuchs and the scent of burning myrrh, a prophecy was etched into a gold leaf so thin it trembled at a breath. 2 sons, 1 womb, shall tear the sky asunder, one crowned by day, the other by raven's wing. At first, it seemed just another courtly riddle until Queen Statera gave birth to twin princes, and the empire watched with bated breath as their destinies unfolded with terrifying symmetry. Artaxerxes, the elder by mere minutes, was born at high noon, his first cries coinciding with a solar flare so bright it scorched the palace observatory's charts. His brother Otchus entered the world at midnight during a lunar eclipse, midwives later swearing his eyes reflected torchlight like a predator's. The prophecy's crowned by day line manifested swiftly. Artaxerxes thrived under tutors, mastering statecraft and earning his father's favor, while Otchus lurked in the archives, whispering with mercenary captains and memorizing siege tactics by candlelight. Court poets noted how they moved through palace life as inversions of each other. Artaxerxes in white linen at feasts, Otchus in black armor at war games. Yet the prophecy's true brilliance lay in its political foresight. When their father died unexpectedly, some said poisoned, others claimed his heart simply gave out from the strain of ruling. The twins' rivalry exploded into civil war. But here's where fate's machinery revealed its gears. The conflict followed the prophecy's roadmap with eerie precision. Artaxerxes controlled the treasury and official army, fulfilling crowned by day. Otchus commanded the shadow forces, Assyrian mercenaries, hill tribe assassins, and disgraced former satraps, exactly as Raven's Wing suggested. Even their battle strategies mirrored their births. Artaxerxes fought open field engagements at noon, while Otchus preferred midnight ambushes, his troops smearing their faces with ash to vanish in darkness. The war's climax came at the Battle of Twin Rivers, where chroniclers describe an omen no one could ignore. As the brothers' armies clashed, a freak storm split the sky, one side blazing with sunlight, the other choked with thunderheads. Their swords met at the exact center of the battlefield, and in that moment the prophecy's most cryptic line unfolded. The sky's tear shall sow the earth's wound. Artaxerxes' blade pierced Otchus' lung just as lightning struck a nearby oak, the splintered trunk impaling Artaxerxes through the chest. They died staring at each other, their blood mingling in the mud, while their shocked armies watched vultures circle overhead. Not the eagles of empire, but carrion birds dark as ravens' wings. But the prophecy wasn't finished. Buried in temple records was a final stanza, long suppressed by the priests. From their spilled seed springs a garden of swords. Within a decade, their bastard sons raised new armies, plunging Persia into another generation of war. Archaeologists excavating the royal cemetery found something chilling. The twins' tombs, built side by side as if in reconciliation, had their inscriptions deliberately defaced. Not by enemies, but by their own descendants, as if trying to erase the prophecy's hold. Yet even in silence, the message endured. Some divisions aren't healed by time. They're inherited. Today, villagers near the old battlefield tell of seeing twin specters at dusk, one golden, one shadowed, locked in eternal combat. Scholars dismiss it as folklore. But on certain evenings, when the wind blows just right, you can almost hear the clang of ghostly swords and the whisper of a prophecy that refuses to stay buried. On the eve of the Persian New Year, as the royal court prepared for celebrations, a lone messenger stumbled into the palace with lips cracked from haste. His words carried a horror no feast could mask. The empire's northern army, 50,000 strong, had vanished without a trace. No battle cries, no scattered weapons, just empty tents swaying in the wind and campfires left burning. The only clue, a prophecy carved into a stone pillar near the abandoned camp. When the earth yawns and the stars blink twice, the king's fist shall grasp at shadows. At first, the generals suspected desertion until scouts found the soldiers' personal effects still in place. Gold coins lay stacked beside unmade beds. Helmets hung from tent poles as if their owners meant to return. Even the cavalry's prized Nicaean horses stood tethered, their feed buckets half full. But the prophecy's real terror lay in its precision. The earth yawning became horrifyingly clear when geologists uncovered a massive limestone sinkhole beneath the camp, its edges lined with scrapes from armor. The stars blinking twice matched astronomers' records of a rare double meteor shower that night, bright enough to disorient sentries. As for the king's fist-grasping shadows, that came weeks later when rescue teams lowered lanterns into the sinkhole only for the flames to snuff out at exactly 40 cubits deep, as if something below were breathing. Theories erupted like spring floods. Some swore the soldiers were swallowed by the Angra Mainyu, Zoroastrian demons of the deep. Others whispered of mutiny, pointing to clay tablets found in the officers' tents, lists of grievances about withheld wages and rotten rations. But the most chilling evidence came from a shepherd boy who'd watched from nearby hills. His testimony, preserved on a scrap of leather, described how the army had marched in perfect formation toward a singing cloud that glowed like polished brass, their spears held high as if in salute. Then the mist thickened, and when it cleared, only silence remained. Modern investigations add eerie layers. Soil samples show traces of a hallucinogenic fungus that grows locally during wet springs. Could entire legions have followed a shared delusion into the abyss? Satellite imagery reveals the sinkhole connects to underground rivers, possibly carrying bodies miles away. Yet the prophecy's final line, scratched onto a rock near the site, resists all explanation. What the earth claims, the sky remembers. To this day, on clear nights, shepherds near the ruins swear they hear metallic echoes rising from the ground. Not screams, not moans, but the rhythmic clang of distant spears beating against shields, as if time itself fractured that night, leaving the lost army forever marching just beyond the veil of our world. The old woman's hands trembled as she clutched the hem of the high priest's robe, her breath sour with the metallic tang of death. Listen, she rasped, her voice like wind through dry reeds. When the jackal weds the lioness and the river flows backward to kiss the moon, the last king will choke on his own shadow. The priests exchanged uneasy glances. This was no ordinary prophecy. It was the deathbed vision of Roxana the seer, the woman who'd foretold 3 plagues and an emperor's fall with terrifying exactness. Now delirious with fever, her final words sounded like nonsense, until the pieces began clicking into place decades later, one grotesque metaphor at a time. Jackal weds the lioness first revealed its meaning in the marriage alliance between Persia's last Sasanian king. Yazdijerd III, and the daughter of a Turkic warlord whose banner bore a golden jackal. The union was meant to strengthen the empire against Arab invaders, but instead it fractured the royal court. Chroniclers wrote of how the queen's faction clashed endlessly with Persian nobles, their infighting leaving the empire vulnerable. As for the river flowing backward, that riddle unraveled during the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah, where Arab strategists diverted the Euphrates to flood Persian encampments, literally reversing tributaries to trap the imperial army. The moon they kissed was the silver crescent standard of the approaching caliphate, glinting mockingly from across the mud-choked battlefield. But the prophecy's cruelest twist lay in its finale, the king choking on his own shadow. Yazdijerd's end was both absurd and horrifying. After years of fleeing Arab forces, he took refuge with a miller who, unrecognizing of his ragged guest, murdered him for a sack of coins. The miller's name, Saya, meaning shadow in Old Persian dialect. The king quite literally died at the hands of shadow. Even the manner of death carried eerie symbolism. Yazdijerd's corpse was found face down in a shallow stream, his mouth filled with silt, as if the earth itself had forced him to swallow his legacy. Yet the prophecy's true power wasn't in predicting events, but in how it mirrored the empire's psychological unraveling. Roxana's words became a ghost haunting Persian decision-makers. Military dispatches from the era revealed generals hesitating to deploy certain tactics, fearing they might make the river flow backward. A vizier's diary confesses he urged Yazdijerd to reject the Turkic marriage, citing the jackal's ill omen. The prophecy didn't just foresee the fall, it orchestrated it, planting seeds of doubt that grew into fatal mistakes. Modern linguists analyzing Roxana's original Aramaic phrasing discovered another layer. Her river metaphor used a verb tense suggesting cyclical recurrence, and her shadow was plural, implying not one king's downfall but many. Sure enough, when Iran's last Shah fled in 1979, protesters scrawled Roxana's words on palace walls. Some say history doesn't repeat but rhymes. The oracle's dying breath suggests otherwise. It's a spiral, descending in ever-tightening coils. The river keeps flowing backward. The shadows never stop waiting. Roxana's dying words didn't just foretell an empire's fall, they ignited a fire in the hearts of the desperate. Within months of Yazdijerd's murder, pilgrims began gathering at the seer's crumbling tomb, leaving offerings of myrrh and etched copper plates begging for visions. What started as a whisper grew into something far more potent, the cult of the oracle, a sect that worshipped not gods, but the terrifying precision of prophecy itself. Their creed was simple: if history could be predicted, perhaps it could be rewritten. The cult's rituals were shaped by the prophecy's very metaphors. Followers wore jackal teeth and lion manes knotted together during solstice ceremonies, embodying the jackal wed to the lioness. They practiced a form of reverse meditation by moonlight, staring at reflected rivers until their eyes burned, an attempt to see backward like the waters. Most striking was their burial custom, placing silver coins over the dead's eyelids to prevent their shadows from choking the afterlife. Archaeologists excavating their shrines found hundreds of these tarnished discs, each one a silent plea against fate's grip. But the cult's true power lay in its subversion of Persian spirituality, where Zoroastrianism focused on the eternal struggle between Ahura Mazda and Angra Mainyu. The oracle's followers believed in something more radical, that time itself was the enemy, a wheel that could be broken. Their underground temples housed mirror chronologies, vast murals where historical events were painted backward from Apocalypse to Genesis. A recovered scroll from their secret archives explains the heresy: if the river remembers its course upstream, so too may man. Their influence seeped into Persia's dying breaths. When caliphate forces stormed the last Sasanian stronghold, they reported defenders chanting Roxana's prophecy as they fought, not in despair but with eerie joy. Graffiti in the ruins of Ctesiphon suggests why. The shadow swallows kings, but the word outruns the sword. even in defeat, the cult had the last laugh. Their greatest secret, hidden in plain sight, was that prophecies aren't shackles, they're weapons. By convincing conquerors they were inevitable, they made them careless. By teaching the conquered that doom has patterns, they gave them keys. Centuries later, when Safavid mystics revived Persian identity, they borrowed the cult's most potent idea, that destiny is a language and fluency grants power. Today, tourists visiting Roxana's restored tomb often miss the faint script beneath her epitaph. It's not a plea or a prayer, but an instruction. Read the river's path, not its current. The prophecy never died, it just learned patience. The sailors called it the Laughing Ship, a cursed vessel painted crimson from bow to stern. Its masts hung with silver bells that rang in windless air. On the docks of Hormuz, where Persian merchants traded spices and silk, the ship's arrival sparked whispers. An old fisherman, his hands gnarled from decades of hauling nets, crossed himself and muttered a prophecy passed down through generations. When the sea bleeds red and the bells sing without breath, the blind shall lead the sighted to the deep. The ship's crew scoffed, tossing coins at his feet as if to buy silence. They should have bought wisdom instead. The prophecy's first warning came true before the anchor was raised. At dawn, the harbor waters turned crimson not from blood, but from a bloom of algae so dense it looked like the waves had been painted. The ship's owner, a wealthy merchant named Varam, ignored it, boasting that red was the color of luck in his homeland. Then came the bells. As the crew loaded the final crates of saffron and pearls, the silver chimes began to ring, though no breeze stirred. A Zoroastrian priestess, her face veiled in black, stepped forward with a final warning. The sea remembers every fool's name. Varam laughed, tossing her a gold coin that landed in the algae-covered shallows, where it sank like a tiny setting sun. 3 days into the voyage, the madness began. The ship's navigator, a grizzled Cypriot who'd sailed further than any living man, woke screaming that his charts had gone blank. Not ruined blank, as if the ink had never existed. Then the cooks swore their fresh water barrels now held only salt, though no one had tampered with them. The final straw came when the crew realized their compass needles all pointed not north but downward toward the black depths beneath them. The prophecy's blind leading the sighted line revealed its meaning. The ship's captain, a veteran of 40 monsoons, had gone inexplicably blind overnight. Yet he insisted he could still feel the way home, urging the crew to trust him. Desperate men will embrace even the cruelest delusions. The end came on a moonless night when the sailors swore they saw glowing shapes moving beneath the waves. Not fish, not sharks, but vast indistinct forms that pulsed with sickly light. The captain, his milky eyes wide, ordered full sails into what he claimed was a safe channel. The bells rang furiously as the ship struck the rocks, its crimson hull splitting like overripe fruit. Survivors later claimed the algae clung to the drowning men, dragging them under with unnatural weight. Only one sailor lived, washing ashore days later, his hair bleached white and his pockets full of salt-stained pearls. When asked what happened, he'd just tap his ear and whisper, "The bells are still ringing." Centuries later, divers exploring the wreck found something chilling. The ship's log, preserved in an airtight chest, contained entries written after the disaster dates, weather notes, even a detailed account of the crew's drowning. The final page held a single line in shaky script. The sea wasn't hungry, it was waiting. Some say the prophecy wasn't about one doomed voyage, but a cycle. Every 50 years, fishermen near Hormuz report seeing a crimson sail on the horizon, its silver bells ringing across still waters, and every time some fool mistakes it for a chance at fortune. The night the moon turned to blood over Persepolis, the royal astrologers scrambled to their instruments with shaking hands, not out of awe but terror. An ancient prophecy carved into the obsidian walls of the temple of Anahita had warned of this exact celestial alignment. When the moon drinks the sun's fire and wears crimson like a bride's veil, the king's shadow shall not meet the dawn. The omen was unmistakable, a total lunar eclipse. Its copper hue, amplified by volcanic ash in the atmosphere, would coincide with the death of a ruler. But what chilled the court wasn't the prediction itself. It was the name whispered in the prophecy's margins, a name that hadn't yet been born into history: King Artabanus IV. The eclipse's timing defied coincidence. Babylonian star charts, later recovered by archaeologists, show the event occurred on the third night of the month of Aban, a date sacred to Anahita, goddess of both water and sovereignty. Worse, the moon passed directly through the constellation Draco, which Persian seers associated with betrayal. Yet the prophecy's real genius lay in its physiological precision. It didn't just foretell a king's death, it described the manner. The crown spills when the heart forgets to beat between one breath and the next. When Artabanus succumbed to a sudden cardiac arrest during the eclipse's peak, his physicians recorded something eerie. The king had been laughing at a jest when he clutched his chest, dead before his wine cup hit the floor, his heart literally pausing between exhale and inhale. But the prophecy's aftermath was even more unsettling. Chroniclers wrote of how the eclipse's red glow lingered unnaturally long, bathing the palace in crimson light for nearly 3 hours, far exceeding the typical duration. Modern astronomers confirm this anomaly. Ash from the eruption of Mount Etna that year likely magnified the effect, yet the ancients saw darker forces at work. A surviving fragment from the high priest's diary describes frantic attempts to wash the moon's stain from the king's corpse, as if the very light had marked him for death. The deepest mystery, however, lies in the prophecy's origins. Infrared scans of the temple walls revealed the Artabanus passage wasn't part of the original text. It had been added later in a different hand. But here's what defies explanation. The ink pigments matched those used exclusively during Artabanus' reign, centuries after the prophecy was first carved. Either someone had access to long-lost materials, or as the temple's last caretaker claimed before vanishing, the wall writes its own endings. Today, villagers near Persepolis still avoid looking at eclipses, muttering an old phrase that doesn't appear in any official record: the moon remembers who it's kissed. Perhaps prophecies aren't just predictions. Perhaps they're rendezvous points in time where history keeps its appointments. The royal physician's hands shook as he rolled up the prisoner's sleeve, revealing a mark that shouldn't exist, a crescent-shaped scar glowing faintly silver in the torchlight. The courtroom gasped. According to an ancient prophecy etched into the throne room's obsidian floor, this was the traitor's mark, a sign said to appear on those destined to betray their kings. The verse was specific: when the moon's tear stains the flesh, the hand that feeds will bear the serpent's kiss. For centuries, Persian courts had used this prophecy as their ultimate lie detector, believing traitors bore invisible signs that only revealed themselves under the right celestial conditions. This wasn't superstition, it was forensic science centuries ahead of its time. The prophecy's moon's tear referred to a rare lunar phase where moonlight passed through a prism of high-altitude ice crystals, casting a peculiar silver-blue glow. Under this light, certain scars or tattoos became visible due to an ancient ink made from crushed scorpion shells and mercury sulfide, a concoction spies used to discreetly identify allies. The real genius lay in how the marks only appeared during specific astrological alignments, creating a built-in expiration date for covert networks. A recovered spy's confession from the Sasanian era lays it bare. We marked each other during Mars retrograde when the prophecy's eye sleeps. But the system had flaws, and false positives became its darkest legacy. Court records describe a general executed because his battlefield wound happened to resemble the mark during an eclipse. His last words haunt historians: the moon lies. Even the marking's meanings morphed over time. What began as a simple crescent denoting mercenaries branched into elaborate symbols: a spider for poisoners, a broken arrow for deserters, all documented in a clandestine manual found beneath Isfahan's central prison. The prophecy's most chilling application, though, wasn't catching traitors, it was creating them. Ambitious viziers realized they could weaponize the marks by applying them to rivals. A clay tablet from the reign of Khosrow Roman II details how a chancellor had his enemies tattooed while they slept, then staged celestial events to reveal their guilt. The tactic backfired spectacularly when a marked scribe, knowing he'd be executed regardless, leaked state secrets to the Byzantines. Modern dermatologists analyzing descriptions of the marks suggest they were likely a form of latent tattoo activated by light-sensitive compounds. But the prophecy's true power was psychological. A recovered letter from a condemned spy captures this perfectly. It matters not if the mark is real, only that all believe it is. Today, the ruins of the interrogation chambers still bear grooves where suspects were chained beneath moonlit oculus windows, their skin waiting to betray them. Some say if you listen closely during a lunar eclipse, you can still hear the whispers of the unjustly marked, their protests lost to a prophecy that cared more for symbolism than truth. In the dusty outskirts of Rai, where merchants haggled over spices and scholars debated the stars, a potter named Farah went about his humble work unaware that his hands shaped more than clay. A prophecy etched into the foundation stone of the city's oldest well spoke of him centuries before his birth. When the locusts blot out the sun and the towers tremble, salvation will rise from the wheel's turner, his name lost until the earth coughs up its secrets. At the time, scribes assumed it referred to some future nobleman dabbling in ceramics as a pastime. They couldn't have been more wrong. The locusts came in the summer of 612, a swarming darkness that devoured crops from Isfahan to Khorasan. Then the earthquake struck, toppling minarets, cracking aqueducts, and leaving Rai's streets choked with dust and despair. That's when Faraz, a man who'd spent his life molding vessels for others, became something far greater. With the city's water supply severed and cholera spreading, he repurposed his kilns into sterilization furnaces, baking contaminated clay jars at temperatures that killed pathogens. His workshop became a refuge where he taught survivors to craft water filters from porous clay and crushed silver, a technique now recognized as an early form of antimicrobial purification. The prophecy's wheel's turner wasn't poetic metaphor, it was literal. Salvation spun into existence on his potter's wheel. Yet history, like the wealthy who dismissed him, nearly erased Faraz entirely. Official chronicles of the disaster credited the city's survival to the governor's prayers and imported grain. It took 8 centuries for the truth to resurface quite literally, when a 21st century archaeologist stumbled upon a buried kiln filled with strange, spouted vessels. Residue analysis revealed traces of colloidal silver, while cuneiform tablets nearby detailed Faraz's methods. Most haunting of all, the kiln's base bore his personal seal, a wheel encircling a locust. The prophecy's final line, his name lost until the earth coughs up its secrets, proved tragically accurate. Faraz died penniless, his innovations dismissed as peasant superstition. But modern science now confirms what the ancients glimpsed. His silver-laced filters removed 90% of waterborne pathogens, outperforming medieval European methods by centuries. Today, his designs inspire low-cost ceramic water purifiers used in disaster zones worldwide. Perhaps the greatest lesson lies not in the prophecy's foresight, but in its irony. The towers trembling weren't just physical, they were the towering arrogance of those who assumed heroes wear crowns. The earth didn't just cough up Faraz's secrets, it whispered a timeless warning. Salvation often wears the dust of the overlooked. The walls of Qalat al-Bahrain still whisper of a siege that outlasted empires, not with the clatter of swords, but with an eerie prophecy carved into its oldest gate. When the ravens nest in the battering rams and the guards grow moss upon their shields, the city shall neither fall nor stand free. At first, defenders took it as poetry, then the real strangeness began. History records the city's siege lasting only 11 months before a negotiated truce, but the ruins tell a different story. Excavations revealed layer upon layer of hastily rebuilt barricades, their timbers studded with bird bones, not from carrion, but from generations of ravens that had nested in the war machines left rusting outside the walls. The prophecies, ravens in battering rams, wasn't metaphor. It was an ecological time capsule. Radiocarbon dating proved the nest spanned centuries, long after historians claimed the conflict ended. Even more unsettling were the armor fragments found cemented to the walls by a peculiar green patina, a mineral growth resembling moss that forms only after decades of exposure to humid sea air. The guards hadn't just abandoned their posts, they'd fossilized in place. What transformed this from a military oddity into a fulfillment of prophecy was the psychological stalemate that followed. Treaties were signed, but the city's gates remained sealed by mutual superstition. Conquerors avoided its treasury, fearing curses. Traders diverted caravans around its silent streets. A recovered merchant's ledger from the Timurid era lists Kalat al-Bahrain as the place where time forgets to move, with notes about phantom sentries seen pacing the battlements under full moons. Modern archaeologists confirmed the surreal truth. The siege never formally lifted. Each new dynasty inherited the blockade like an unsolvable riddle, leaving the city in a state of perpetual suspension, neither conquered nor liberated, just as the prophecy decreed. The ruins themselves became a self-fulfilling omen. Sections of the outer wall collapsed inward rather than outward, as if the city had turned its defenses against itself. Wells were found filled not with debris, but with hundreds of intact amphorae emergency water stores that suggested generations lived under unspoken siege mentality. Most haunting is an inscription in the governor's palace, added long after his death. "We are not besieged by enemies, but by our own shadows." Perhaps the prophecy's greatest trick was making eternity feel mundane. Today, tourists stroll past the same gates where archers once stood watch, unaware that the siege technically continues. The ravens still nest in the ruins. The moss still grows, and the city, caught between memory and myth, waits for an ending that was never written. The great hall of the Temple of Anahita fell silent as the high priest lifted the velvet shroud, revealing a disk of polished bronze so flawless it seemed to drink the torchlight. "Behold the mirror of truth," he intoned, "wherein past and future dance as one." According to temple scrolls, the artifact wasn't merely reflective. It showed viewers their deepest fears and most hidden truths, whether they wished to see them or not. But the prophecy warning of its fate was etched into the mirror's very frame. When the silver eye closes, kings shall rule blind, and the people will wander as beggars in their own cities. No one imagined those words would unfold with such cruel precision. The mirror's theft wasn't a crime of opportunity, it was an act of surgical sabotage. On the night of the autumn equinox, while priests celebrated the festival of Mihragan, thieves bypassed 7 locked doors and a maze of pressure-sensitive tiles without triggering a single alarm. The only clue, a single feather from a Lammergeier vulture, a bird Persians associated with ill omens, left deliberately atop the empty pedestal. This wasn't random looting. It was someone who knew the mirror's true power and feared it. What followed was a collapse both sudden and surreal. Within months, the royal court descended into chaos. Advisors who'd once debated policy with razor logic now squabbled over omens in chicken entrails. Tax collectors, deprived of the mirror's truth-revealing power, could no longer spot fraudulent merchants, and the treasury bled gold like a gutted stag. Even the justice system unraveled without the mirror's ability to expose lies. Trials became spectacles of hearsay and bribed witnesses. The prophecy's reference to kings ruling blind proved painfully literal when Shah Hormuz IV, a ruler previously known for his shrewdness, ordered an invasion based on a soothsayer's dream of talking horses. Yet the mirror's most insidious effect was societal. Persian culture had long prized self-reflection literally and philosophically. miniature bronze mirrors were common household items, engraved with proverbs like "Know thyself to know the divine." With a great mirror gone, a collective anxiety took root. Marketplaces buzzed with rumors of doppelgangers impersonating loved ones. Wives hid their faces from husbands, fearing their true thoughts might be read without the mirror's protective scrutiny. A recovered diary from a noblewoman captures the paranoia. If truth has no home, where shall honesty dwell? Archaeologists piecing together the aftermath found something peculiar. The mirror's theft coincided with a sudden spike in buried hoards, coins, jewelry, even children's toys hidden beneath floorboards across the empire. It was as if without the mirror's gaze, people no longer trusted their possessions to remain theirs. The prophecy's final line, long considered cryptic, now reads like a diagnosis. A nation that forgets its face will not recognize its soul. But here's the twist that haunts historians. 3 centuries after the mirror vanished, a Macedonian soldier digging a latrine near Babylon unearthed a bronze disc wrapped in rotting silk. His commander, recognizing the Anahita temple's insignia, sent it to Alexander the Great's camp. The general's diary that night contains a single eerie entry. "The mirror shows nothing but the fire behind my eyes. By dawn, it had vanished again, lost, some say, not to thieves but to time's indifference." Perhaps prophecies aren't warnings. Perhaps they're simply reminders that every civilization, no matter how mighty, is one stolen mirror away from forgetting who it truly is. The priests of Mount Damavand knew the mountain's whispers long before the earth split open. Deep in their temple archives lay a prophecy carved into a slab of volcanic rock. When the dragon beneath the mountain yawns, his breath will paint the river black, and the sky shall wear ashes like a widow's veil. For generations, it was dismissed as poetic metaphor until the year 536, when Damavand erupted with a fury that choked Persia in darkness for months. But what separates this prophecy from vague doomsaying is its terrifying geological precision. The river black wasn't just ash-choked water. It was the La Valley mudflows where pyroclastic surges superheated glacial runoff into a boiling torrent of black sludge that scoured entire villages off the map. Excavated ruins show pottery melted into strange glassy puddles, exactly as the prophecy's dragon's breath suggested. Modern volcanologists have pieced together how eerily accurate the prediction was. The eruption's VI4 explosion matched the widow's veil description, ash plumes reaching the stratosphere, dimming sunlight across 3 continents. Ice cores from Greenland contained sulfur spikes from that exact year, corroborating Persian accounts of years without summer, but the real chilling detail. The prophecy didn't just forecast the disaster, it encoded survival instructions. A recently deciphered portion advises those who would live must seek the serpent's coils, which villagers interpreted as fleeing to caves with geothermal vents. Archaeological digs in those caves found intact food stores and tools, proving some heeded the warning. The aftermath revealed the prophecy's cruelest twist. Survivors reported a second lava flow weeks later, one that diverted suddenly at a village where priests had sacrificed white stallions. Geologists now confirm magma follows subterranean fissures, and the sacrifice site sits atop a basalt dike that could have redirected flows. Was this divine intervention, or did the ancients understand volcanic plumbing better than we assumed? A cuneiform tablet from the era holds a cryptic clue. The mountain drinks what men pour and repays in fire. Today, Damavand's slopes still exhale sulfurous fumes, a reminder that prophecies aren't stories. They're alarm systems wired deep into the land itself. And if you listen closely when the wind shifts, the old priest's warning still echoes. The dragon never sleeps, he only pauses between breaths. The stones of Persepolis still hum with secrets if you press your ear close enough. Not just the murmurs of history, but something far stranger. Deep in the royal archives, buried beneath layers of dust and bureaucratic scrolls, lies a single clay tablet that speaks not of kings or battles, but of the palace walls themselves. The prophecy, attributed to the architect Merodach of Ecbatana, reads, "When the raven pecks at dawn and the jackal laughs at noon, these walls will sing with the voices of those not yet born." At the time, the royal overseers dismissed it as an artisan's poetic fancy, but when the first whispers began centuries later, dripping from the very mortar between the stones, even the skeptics fell silent. It started with the Eastern Gallery, a low, persistent hum that stable boys swore sounded like distant conversation. Then came the carvings. Masons repairing a cracked pillar noticed something impossible. Faint cuneiform script that hadn't been there the day before, spelling out phrases like "the king's cup overflows with sand" and "the general's horse stumbles on pebbles." At first, they assumed it was some prank until the phrases began manifesting in reality. The king did indeed choke during a feast when a desert storm blew grit into his wine, and the cavalry commander's prized stallion broke its leg on a streambed of smooth stones. The walls weren't just whispering, they were stitching the future into their very bricks. Modern archaeologists laser scanning the palace found the architect's hidden genius. The walls were built with a rare limestone composite that conducted vibrations like a massive soundboard, capturing snippets of conversations and replaying them under specific temperature changes. But here's the chilling part: the prophecies emerged only when certain carvings aligned with sunlight patterns during solstices, casting shadows that revealed hidden messages. The raven pecking at dawn referred to a decorative frieze whose shadow at sunrise pointed to a secret chamber behind the throne room. Inside, clay models of every major palace structure, each one inscribed with warnings about weak points and future collapses. The prophecy's most haunting layer, though, is how it encodes architectural vulnerabilities. One recently deciphered wall segment warns, "When the moon kisses the seventh pillar thrice, the roof will remember its weight." Sure enough, historians found records of a ceiling collapse in that very hall during the third lunar eclipse of King Artaxerxes' reign, when the moon's path crossed a specific column's shadow line. The architects didn't just predict the future, they built a countdown into the palace itself, yet the real mystery lies in the whispers still unaccounted for. Digital audio analysis of the wall's acoustics picked up faint, rhythmic pulses, not random noise, but patterns matching Persian poetic meters. Some linguists believe entire prophecies are still dormant, waiting for the right combination of heat, humidity, and celestial alignment to awaken. Like the last line Merodach carved into a hidden cornerstone, stones are patient, they speak when the listeners are ready. Perhaps the walls are still talking. Perhaps we've just forgotten how to hear. The wheat fields of Khorasan should have been gold under the summer sun instead. They crumbled to dust between the fingertips of desperate farmers. Decades before the Great Famine, an oracle's warning had been etched into the stone walls of a granary in Nishapur. When the plow breaks its own back and the earth refuses her children, the crown will count grains like jewels. At the time, the royal agronomists dismissed it as peasant superstition, but the prophecy's first signs weren't mystical, they were mathematical. Records from the imperial surveyors show the soil's decline began subtly. Crop yields dropped by 5% one year, then 10% the next. The plow breaking its own back metaphor became devastatingly literal as farmers reported tools snapping in hardened earth that had once been loamy and fertile. Yet the ruling class, obsessed with military expansion, ignored the data. Tax ledgers reveal they actually increased grain requisitions during this period, leaving villages without seed reserves. A surviving plea from a village elder captures the coming catastrophe. You ask for bread from an oven that has no fire. The prophecy's next phase unfolded with cruel precision. The earth refusing her children described a phenomenon modern agronomists now recognize as allelopathy, where overfarmed soil releases chemicals that inhibit new growth. Ancient irrigation canals, clogged by generations of poor maintenance, turned into salty death traps for crops. Then came the locusts. Unlike typical swarms, these insects arrived in waves precisely timed to the lunar cycles the prophecy had referenced as the moon's hungry face. What transformed this disaster into a fulfillment of prophecy was the aristocracy's response. Instead of releasing emergency grain stores, the viziers hoarded them, convinced scarcity would drive up prices and enrich the treasury. The crown-counting grains like jewels line proved tragically accurate. Accounting scrolls show officials weighing individual millet seeds to ration starving provinces. A smuggled letter from a palace servant describes nobles playing dice games with pebbles representing human lives. The vizier laughs when he throws a 7, for that's the number of villages one sack might feed. Yet the prophecy held one final twist. Its last stanza, often overlooked, warned, "The cure grows where the sickles sleep." In the famine's worst year, a group of farmers abandoned their sterile fields and retreated to overgrown riverbanks, land considered worthless for cultivation. There, they discovered wild relatives of domesticated wheat growing unchecked. These drought-resistant strains, long ignored by imperial agriculturalists, became the seeds of recovery. The very land the aristocracy had written off as barren held the key to survival. Today, drought-resistant crops derived from those wild grasses feed millions across the Middle East. The Granary Walls prophecy, once mocked as doom-mongering, now reads like an agricultural textbook written centuries ahead of its time. Perhaps the ancients weren't predicting fate, they were diagnosing patterns we're only now learning to see. And if you listen closely to the wind in Khorasan's fields, you might still hear the echoes of their warning. Hunger isn't an act of the gods, but a ledger of human choices. On the eve of the Battle of Gaugamela, as Alexander the Great's generals pored over maps and scouts tallied Persian forces, a sentry's scream shattered the camp's uneasy silence. There, shimmering in the moonlit dust beyond the Macedonian lines, stood ranks of spectral warriors, their armor glinting like cold starlight, their spears raised in silent salute. This wasn't fatigue or fear playing tricks on the eyes. It was the fulfillment of a Persian prophecy carved into a battlefield steel centuries earlier. When the dead muster at the crossroads of kings, the living shall fight with borrowed courage. What makes this prophecy extraordinary isn't just its accuracy, it's the meticulous way it describes a phenomenon modern psychologists call battlefield apparition syndrome. The dead mustering referenced wasn't poetic license. Historical accounts from multiple cultures describe similar visions before decisive conflicts. Roman legions reported seeing fallen comrades form ghostly testudo formations on the morning of Cani. Samurai chronicles speak of ancestral warriors materializing in the mist at Sekigahara. But the Persian seers didn't just predict these phantoms, they understood their function. The prophecy's mention of borrowed courage aligns with modern studies on neurobiology under stress, where the brain's limbic system projects reassuring images during extreme duress. Yet the Gaugamela apparitions had chilling specifics. Macedonian diaries describe the specters wearing crescent moon crests, exclusive to elite Persian units destroyed in earlier battles. Even more unsettling, these details match the prophecy's neglected second stanza. They come not as they were, but as you remember them. Alexander himself allegedly recognized a phantom officer he'd killed at Issus, noting the same missing finger he'd severed with his sword. This wasn't random hallucination, it was memory given form, a psychological weapon forged by prophecy. The aftermath revealed the vision's true brilliance. While Alexander's men interpreted the phantoms as omens of victory, Persian defectors later confessed their army had seen mirrored apparitions, Macedonian ghosts with lion skin cloaks. The prophecy had engineered a feedback loop of supernatural intimidation. Each side convinced the other was doomed. Modern archaeologists excavating the battlefield found something peculiar. Deposits of magnetite-rich sand that, when heated by daytime sun and cooled rapidly by desert nights, can produce fleeting mirages. Did the seers know the land itself would conspire to manifest their words? Perhaps the prophecy's most haunting legacy lies in its quiet postscript, discovered on a scrap of parchment in a Babylonian archive. The greatest battles are fought twice, first in the mind, then in the blood. Across centuries and cultures, that truth endures. Whether spectral or psychological, the phantom army never truly disbands. It simply waits for the next crossroads, the next moment when fear and faith collide, ready to march again through the twilight of human perception. The treaty was etched into a bronze tablet the size of a warrior's shield. Its clauses so sacred they were sealed not just with wax but with the blood of kings. For generations, the covenant of the two rivers held Persia and Babylon in uneasy peace until the year the stars turned against them. A prophecy inscribed beneath the treaty's final clause foretold its doom with surgical precision. When the scribe's hand falters and the seal cracks of its own accord, the rivers will run backward with the weight of broken oaths. At first, diplomats dismissed it as ceremonial flourish. Then came the day the unthinkable happened. The bronze tablet split clean down the middle in the palace treasury, without a single hand touching it. The violation began subtly. Babylonian merchants accused Persian officials of skimming tariffs, while Persian farmers whispered that Babylonian dams were stealing their water. Trade disputes festered into grudges, then into troop movements along the frontier. But the prophecy's real warning lay in its timing. The tablet didn't crack during some heated negotiation. It shattered on the summer solstice, when the Euphrates waters historically ran lowest. That same week, scouts reported something impossible. The river's current had reversed near the border, pulling dead fish and uprooted reeds upstream instead of down. Hydrologists now believe an underground earthquake likely shifted subterranean channels, but to the ancients it was proof. The gods themselves were voiding the treaty. What followed was a masterclass in how prophecies manipulate politics. Babylonian priests declared the reversal a divine mandate for war, while Persian generals cited the prophecy to justify preemptive strikes. A recovered dispatch from the front lines captures the surreal logic. We fight not because we choose to, but because the river has already chosen for us. Yet the prophecy's cruelest twist was its aftermath. The war dragged on for years, exhausting both empires just in time for Alexander's armies to sweep in and conquer them both. The covenant hadn't just broken, it had paved the way for its own replacement. Modern parallels are unsettlingly precise. Climate accords abandoned as glaciers melt, nuclear treaties collapsing amid geopolitical heat. The pattern repeats. A recently deciphered cuneiform footnote suggests the ancients knew this cycle would never end. Oaths are ropes of sand, tightened only until the next tide. Perhaps true diplomacy isn't about preventing the unraveling, but learning to weave faster than the currents can pull us apart. The golden halls of Persepolis had fallen silent, their once vibrant tapestries now frayed by time, when a lone Zoroastrian priest pressed his palm against the temple's innermost wall and whispered the last prophecy of his dying order. Empires are but waves upon the shore, each thinks itself eternal until the tide remembers its name. Carved into the sacred stone beneath his fingers lay the 30th and final revelation. A vision so vast it stretched beyond kingdoms and into the bones of history itself. This was no ordinary prediction of kings and battles. It was a map of time's great spiral, tracing Persia's destiny through collapse and rebirth across millennia. The prophecy's power lies in its refusal to declare an ending. Where other visions foretold doom with finality, this one spoke in cycles. When the last fire temple dims, its embers shall birth 10,000 sparks. And so they did. When Arab conquests toppled the Sasanian Empire, refugees carried Zoroastrian texts to India, where they became the Parsis, a community that would later produce visionaries like Freddie Mercury and nuclear pioneer Homi Bhabha. The sparks weren't just survivors, they were transformers, carrying fragments of Persian wisdom into new constellations of influence. But the prophecy's genius was its geological scale. It predicted Persia's resurgences not by human events but by the land itself. The mountain that crumbles today shall be the foundation of tomorrow's throne. Modern geologists confirm this isn't metaphor. The Iranian plateau literally rises 5 centimeters per year as tectonic plates collide, a slow mountain rebirth mirroring the nation's resilience. Even the location where Alexander burned Persepolis now blooms with pomegranate orchards, their roots feeding on the very ashes of empire. The most startling fulfillment, however, emerged in our digital age. The prophecy described a time when all voices become one voice and the old words walk again on lightning roads. Could any phrase better capture how Persian poetry, Rumi's verses, Hafez's ghazals exploded across global social media, that a 14th century mystic's lines about divine love would trend on TikTok, or that Cyrus the Great's clay cylinder declaring human rights would inspire United Nations resolutions, proves the prophecy's unsettling foresight. Yet its final lines hold the key to its endurance. No age truly ends until its children forget the stories. Walk through Tehran today and you'll see this truth alive. Skateboarders ollie past Achaemenid reliefs, their boards decorated with motifs from the Shahnameh. Underground musicians sample Zarathustra's hymns into electronic beats. Even Persepolis lives anew, not as ruins, but as a VR experience where visitors don headsets to stroll its halls in spectral splendor. The prophecy wasn't predicting an ending after all. It was revealing the only immortality that matters: memory's refusal to die. Because when a culture learns to weave its collapse into its rebirth, time doesn't erase it. Time becomes its loom, and on that loom, Persia's tapestry keeps growing, thread by golden thread, into patterns no conqueror could ever unravel. From the fall of kings to the rise of empires, from plagues that darken the sky to wars written in the stars, these 30 prophecies reveal a civilization that peered into time's river and saw its currents with unsettling clarity. The Persians didn't just predict events, they mapped the hidden gears of history where human ambition collided with celestial patterns, where the land itself whispered warnings through droughts and quakes. Consider the precision: a seer's vision of Xerxes' betrayal unfolding exactly as described, down to the assassin's escape on horseback, or the plague prophecy that named symptoms modern epidemiology would only understand centuries later. Even the collapse of cities like Istakhar, foretold in metaphors of greed and crumbling earth, played out with almost mathematical inevitability. What chills the spine isn't just the accuracy, it's the consistency. Across 600 years and dozens of seers, the prophecies share a common thread. They understand history not as random chaos, but as a tapestry woven from repeating patterns. The same warnings echo through time about rulers drunk on power, about rivers diverted by hubris, about shadows of the past returning to haunt the present. The prophecy of the crownless king, Alexander, mirrored the later rise of Nader Shah, both conquerors undone by the very empires they sought to own. The drought that shattered Persia's unity foreshadowed modern water crises from Cape Town to Chennai. It's as if the ancients left us not just predictions, but a diagnostic manual for civilization's fractures. Yet the greatest mystery isn't how they knew, it's why we keep forgetting. The covenant of the two rivers shattered just as its inscription warned, yet today's treaties fray with the same predictability. The crown of smoke that doomed kings now hangs over leaders who weaponize misinformation, their reflections distorting in the digital age's funhouse mirrors. Even the lost army swallowed by the earth finds its echo in modern conflicts where soldiers vanish into propaganda fog. The prophecies suggest an uncomfortable truth: history doesn't repeat, but it rhymes, and we're often deaf to the meter. So where does this leave us, standing at the edge of Persepolis ruins? It's tempting to see these prophecies as relics of a mystical past, but look closer. The final prophecy, the one about empires being waves, holds the key. Persia's visionaries weren't fatalists, they were realists. Their words weren't meant to paralyze with doom, but to awaken. When they spoke of fires rekindling from embers or rivers remembering their paths, they were offering a roadmap for resilience. The same stars that warned of collapse also hinted at renewal, if we're willing to read the signs. Now it's your turn. Do these prophecies reveal a lost science of divination, or are they simply humanity's oldest lesson in cause and effect? Have you ever encountered a prediction, ancient or modern, that sent shivers down your spine? Share your thoughts below and let's keep the conversation alive, because if there's one thing these 30 visions teach us, it's that the future is never truly silent. It just speaks in languages we're still learning.